The government makes allegations all the time. Sometimes the allegations are true. Sometimes they're not true. Sometimes when they accuse somebody of committing a crime, that person is guilty. Sometimes when they accuse somebody of committing a crime, that person is innocent. So I don't know what is to bear. All I can tell you is he needs to get the presumption of innocence.
New witnesses coming forward, vital DNA evidence, and possible connections to other deaths. Let's delve into some recent updates in the Rex Heuermann Gilgo Beach murders case with Professor of Law Jules Epstein. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, as we know, Rex Heuermann, the accused Gilgo Beach killer, is locked up behind bars in Suffolk County, New York, awaiting trial. The Gilgo Beach murders, they became national headlines more than a decade ago when multiple bodies were found. In fact, 11 sets of human remains were discovered along that shoreline. Now, in July, police arrested 60-year-old Manhattan architect Rex Heuermann. He was charged for the murders of 3 women, Melissa Barthelemy, Amber Costello, and Megan Waterman. He is also the prime suspect in the death of a 4th woman, Maureen Brainerd Barnes. He has pled not guilty. He is being held without bond. And as this investigation progresses, we are learning new developments that may impact this case. So let's talk about what impact they may or may not have. I want to bring in right now a fan favorite here at Sidebar. You already know who I'm talking about. Evidence expert and Edward D. Albaum Professor of Law and Director of Advocacy Programs and Clinical Legal Education at Temple University Beasley School of Law. Professor Jules Epstein is back with us. Professor, so good to see you.
Great to be here, and thanks as always for your doing this.
Absolutely. I want to start off with potential witness testimony. And when I talk about these updates, it's not like they happened yesterday. They happened relatively recently, but you and I have not had the chance to talk about it. So first, Suffolk County Sheriff Errol Toulon said that jail staff has interviewed 141 sex workers and at least 12 women, inmates who worked as sex workers, claim to have had interactions with Rex Heuermann. Now, the sheriff said they're still working to verify these claims, but these potential witnesses are actually in the same jail as Heuermann. And we've told everybody before on Sidebar that Heuermann was reportedly this serial user of sex worker services. But now, Jules, the idea that they're interviewing these people, how do you verify their accounts and that they may have, had an interaction with Heuermann?
I have no idea. I don't even know what that means. In other words, if I'm a sex worker, did I keep a phone number? That would be verification. Did I keep some record of places I went to? That would be verification. Did I at least habitually pick up men or get picked up at a particular location? Maybe that's verification. I'm not saying any of these women is lying. We have no way that I know of to objectively tell, they're right.
And that's fair. And look, I think it's important to establish here, verifying that their actual accounts and seeing what that means and whether or not their description of Heuermann is accurate or the recollection is accurate. But assuming for the moment they have a collection of witnesses who said, no, I'm 100% sure I had these interactions with Rex Heuermann, what value would that have to prosecutors at his trial?
So a judge would have to rule that in a case where he is alleged to have picked up 3 escorts and then murdered them, that his using other escorts, right, sex workers, is somehow probative. In other words, it helps to prove, well, gee, if he went with other sex workers, it's slightly more likely that he went with these, and balance that against what kind of a picture is it painting of this guy who, put it in the way a jury might see it, is a lowlife cheating on his wife whenever he can. So we call that balancing the value or the probativeness against the risk of unfair prejudice, of just making him look like a lowlife. And then people saying, well, if you're a lowlife, you're bad. If you're bad, you're more likely a murderer. Well, I guess you did this murder.
Right.
That's always the tension when we bring in acts outside of those that a person is charged with.
All right, we want to thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this video. I think it's pretty clear from the stories that we cover that it is not always safe out there. And when you're hurt, it can be pretty confusing. It can be scary, and you really don't know where to turn. Well, Morgan & Morgan is actually the largest injury law firm in America. And at a time when you already have so much to think about, they make it super easy for you. They have completely modernized the process because you can submit your claim, you sign contracts, you upload documents, you talk to your whole legal team all on your phone. That's it. Yeah, an attorney is going to review your case in just 8 clicks. They also have 4,000 support staff that can help you too, which is amazing to think about. And in terms of price, well, you only pay them if you win. There's no upfront fee. So if you're injured and you want to join the over 3 million people that call them every year, you can submit a claim at www.forthepeople.com/LC Sidebar or by dialing pound law, that's pound 529 on your phone. Now, Mr. Toulon said that we still haven't been able to validate those claims of those women that said that he was violent and aggressive. The Suffolk County Sheriff says that his sex trafficking unit has gained the trust of other escorts. They're expanding now into Nassau County. But again, everything has to be validated and checked upon. I do want to now move on to this potential other witnesses because NBC Dateline has spoke with a number of people. And the first one I'm going to mention in this vein is Nikki Brass, who is a former escort who went on a date with Heuermann 8 years ago. This is according to her. And according to her, he started talking about his interest in true crime and specifically brought up Gilgo, saying how the bodies could have been transported with burlap. Remember, and that's a weird thing to say because camouflage burlap was used on the bodies. But she went on to say his body language, the way he spoke about it, it wasn't a true crime buff. It was somebody who was there. There's a big difference. You can just see it. You can tell like his entire demeanor changed. I told people for years, I said, I swear to God, I went to dinner with the Gilgo Beach killer. People kind of laughed off like, yeah, right. Okay. I'm sure you did. So that's taking that all is true. Is that how valuable is that in a trial against Heuermann?
Prosecutors love to show that someone is looking up news articles about a case or fascinated by a case or focused on a case. And we've seen that in more than one of the cases you and I have talked about. Here, it may have a value exponentially greater, and that's the word burlap. If someone says, yeah, I'm sure they were wrapped in burlap, and no body has yet been discovered, or said differently, if the bodies have been discovered, but the burlap fact wasn't public knowledge, that's eerie insider knowledge.
And of course, we have to be careful. We have to always take these accounts with a grain of salt because somebody could be looking at the information that we know today and using that to say, oh, I remember I was with him, and of course he talked about burlap. We see that in a lot of times high profile cases. Unfortunately, I'm not saying that's the case with Miss Brass, but that's why law enforcement always has to vet these claims to make sure somebody is not just saying something here. But I do want to go now. I was very curious about these other accounts. Again, NBC Dateline interviewed 2 people. It seems almost like character evidence, and I don't know if it's really important, but you have Catherine Shepard, who was a former colleague with Rex Heuermann, said he was nice, he's professional, and even when she slipped and fell on ice, he took her to the hospital, picked up her medication. She did say, though, that there was one odd incident when he was renovating his house. She went to check it out, and they were in the basement, and he said, you can't go in there with respect to one of the rooms. He told her that it was because he had a bunch of guns there and children around. But and remember, police did recover 300 weapons in there. Then you have this neighbor of Heuermann's, Jimmy Mack, in Massapequa Park, where Heuermann lived, who said he got into an altercation with Heuermann only a few months before his arrest. This was over Mack's truck being parked halfway onto the sidewalk. Heuermann was outside of Mack's house, said that he was going to slash the truck's tires. I thought that was, these 2 accounts, well, kind of interesting from a story perspective about who Rex Heuermann is or is not. I don't know how valuable it is in the case against him.
So let's start with the easy one, the neighbor with the truck and I'll slash your tires. There is no way that should come into a criminal case on murder. When I teach evidence law to my students, I say, when somebody wants to bring in something else you did, you have to ask, is the only message, oh, did it once, did it again? In other words, he's violent towards a neighbor. I guess he was violent towards these women. I see no basis for that unless the prosecutor could come up with a theory, and it's a theory, right? That the investigation was closing in, Heuermann knew it, he's getting more agitated. That's a stretch. The coworker thing could help the prosecution or the defense. A criminal defendant accused of a violent crime is allowed to present what we call character testimony, that he or she or they, whoever it is, doesn't have the character of a murderer. So if I'm charged with murder, I would call people to say, I'm nonviolent. I'm not sure you can get there by saying, I helped you when you fell on the black ice, or you helped me, right? The prosecutor's angle is a little different, that he was hiding that room. And whether it's hiding it because of the guns or guns plus burlap, I don't know. But as a prosecutor, I might at least want to explore the you can't go in there evidence for someone who's there to do a job to help them.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a really good point. Stepping away from the murder cases, the three women that he's actually charged with, and we'll go back to that in a minute because there's a key piece of DNA evidence I want to talk to you about. We also know that one of the other questions that's been circulating is whether Heuermann is connected to the unsolved deaths of reported escorts Shannon Gilbert and Karen Vergata. Her remains were actually found in Fire Island. Well, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison said that his team is interviewing 4 new potential witnesses. I'll give everybody an idea. So there is a livery cab driver who provided sworn testimony that she picked up a crying, shaking Gilbert from a motel bathroom as a man who fits the description of Heuermann jumps into his car and leaves. You have another witness who's claiming that she and her boyfriend were swingers and went to Heuermann's home with Vergata, and they engaged in sexual activities. So I'm listening to these potential accounts. I'm listening to the idea of police interviewing these people. Is this significant to you? And how do you think that this investigators and prosecutors may use it?
We have to work backwards here. A judge would have to decide that evidence that he was with 2 other women who disappeared and then were found to be dead is probative in the case of the 3 women victims who he's charged with and not unfairly prejudicial. I think that would be a really tough call for a judge either way. It certainly completes or expands the story. But it's saying to the jury, you have to take a few leaps. Women are dead. He was with them. Other women are dead, right? There may be too much of a missing link there to let it in.
So that's with respect to that, to the current case. But in terms of whether or not he's actually going to be arrested for Vergata and Gilbert, I mean, does that evidence seem significant to you?
Sure. Again, anything that says I actually had contact with these 2 victims is important.
I really wanted to get your perspective going back to the 3 victims he's currently charged with, the DNA. We did a whole sidebar on this, and I really want to get your perspective on it. So this was a big recent development, and that was that the DNA of Heuermann's estranged wife, Asa Ellerup, matched DNA that was found on the victims. This comes from law enforcement sources, multiple reports. Investigators had originally said that Ellerup was linked to hairs found on the victims' bodies. There were 2 female hairs that were found on Megan, one on the tape used to wrap her head. There was another hair found on tape inside of the burlap wrapping around Amber, and another female hair on a belt buckle used to restrain Maureen. Well, now they have confirmed a DNA match to Ellerup. The reporting indicates that the DNA that authorities took from a cheek swab of Ellerup matches the hairs. At the time of this recording, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office has not confirmed the report of the DNA match. And I should tell everybody that Ellerup has not been criminally charged. Investigators say she was out of town when the women disappeared. She's been cleared of all wrongdoing. But we know that they took the cheek swab when Heuermann was arrested. Overall, Jules, what do you think?
We need a 1-minute science lesson.
Okay.
We have hair. There are actually two kinds of DNA. If I were to pluck a hair out of my head right now and we got the whole root, you would get what's called nuclear DNA. And that's the same kind of DNA that if you took a swab or, I bled at the scene or left some of my own skin there somehow, that where you'd get that incredibly powerful DNA profile. But sometimes when hairs come out, we don't get the root. So we just have if you will, the stalk, the rest of the hair. In the rest of the hair is something called mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is not as precise as nuclear DNA. It shows what's called matrilineal heritage, that my mitochondrial DNA will link back to my mother and my mother's heritage. And therefore, my brother has that mitochondrial DNA, and so can some other people with some degree of relationship to my family or other families. So we don't know which kind it is. If it's nuclear DNA, it's incredibly powerful. How did his wife's hair get on that tape unless they were in his house or he grabbed the tape and took it, something like that? If it's mitochondrial DNA, it's still tremendously powerful. You don't need one piece of evidence that guarantees it's Heuermann. You need pieces of evidence that are like pieces of a puzzle. This narrows the universe of people who could have contributed that hair. And coincidentally, one person in that very small universe is his wife. That's really powerful evidence.
On top of the fact that his DNA was connected to the crime scene as well, which is just a huge piece of evidence. We've gotten into that before about the pizza box. And look, I think that's a significant part. The fact that they are confirming it, they had suspicions. Now they're confirming it based on cheek swabs of both him and his wife. Very significant development. Before I let you go, Jules, there's this other update that I got to get your perspective on. So we talked about how this evidence relates to the actual 3 murders, but we've talked about Heuermann potentially being connected to other killings. Well, there's this other update that's very interesting, and it concerns Alicia Showalter Reynolds, who's a woman that was killed in 1996 out in Virginia. Her car was found abandoned on the side of a highway with a white napkin under the windshield wiper, and her body was found 2 months later in a shallow grave. Now, the murder has remained unsolved, but Showalter's siblings say that an old state police sketch of the murder suspect looks like Rex Heuermann. Showalter's brother, Dr. Patrick Showalter, told Pix 11 News, "When I saw the picture of Rex Heuermann, subtract 27 years from the way he looks now, it's the first time I've seen anyone look like any of the composite sketches that were done at the time of my sister's abduction." Showalter's sister, Barbara Johanssons, also told Pix 11, quote, "The similarities are striking. The eyes and the cheeks, the face structure. I'm very curious what you think about that, identifications through composite sketches like this."
So unfortunately, composite sketches are generally not real accurate. None of us has a perfect memory of a face. There's not a camera inside my head that goes click. And Jesse, if I were looking at you, I'd have your face there and I could keep going back and looking at it. And a composite sketch is often done where the police are saying, well, here are a bunch of noses, right? Which nose is it? And that process of looking at multiple noses can alter the witness's memory.
Mm.
That's part one. So we can't assume that a composite sketch is a real accurate capture of what the perpetrator looked like that 20-something years ago, 26 or 7, I guess. Number two, even if it's close, I'm not sure that we have the science yet to be able to take Heuermann's face and subtract 27 years from it and then say, okay, that's the guy. So it's interesting. I'm not saying it is a lead police should not ignore. I'm sorry, should ignore, right? They shouldn't ignore it. It's a lead. I don't think they should run off with the assumption that, oh, yes, it was definitely Heuermann, who apparently had family something like 50 miles away from where this murder occurred. So it's interesting what you can do with a cold case. Maybe there's DNA from there. Lord knows, it's worth checking.
Yep.
But it's not a home run.
Well, it's interesting because this brother and sister of Showalter say Heuermann's mother had lived in Virginia in 1994, so it would have been outside the possibility for him to be there. And Barbara Johansson has said, I would like them to look at the DNA evidence again and see if there's any sort of correlations now that we have all these new tools with genetic databases. So, but that, look, Jules, that really helps. I think we've gotten a good perspective of what we should take away from some of this new evidence and some of this new developments. So thank you so much for coming on, sir. Always appreciate your insight.
Thank you. And again, thank you and your team for the in-depth coverage you bring to these issues.
Appreciate that, Jules. We'll speak to you soon. And that is all we have for you here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. We very much appreciate it. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.